Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hellmite here from Grab the Lantern, bringing you another podcast today. I've kind of decided I got a lot of decent commentary from people, a lot of people saying, yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that. So I figure let's just go ahead and we're going to keep doing this. I figure I'll probably do probably a couple per week, just doing probably one Monday and Friday, and I may do additional ones for like quick patch note rundowns and that sort of thing. So we're just going to jump right into it here today. No particular topic in mind this time, right? It's been fairly quiet as we're starting to approach the end of a patch cycle. So instead what I'm going to be doing is kind of covering a grab bag of topics, I guess you could say. So kind of talking about a few different things here. And we're going to start with the Shyvana changes, which Riot actually published a whole article about her pseudo rework, I guess is the best way you could say it. So they're changing a few things about Shyvana. I don't think it's too unfair to say that Shyvana hasn't been in the greatest of spots right now. She's fairly strong, especially when she gets ahead, but she still suffers, I think, notably in a few locations. She has some wonky things in her kit, and I think what Riot's doing is a fairly decent way of going about it. Now, Shyvana was a champion designed back in the day. You know what, let me turn down the volume on this real quick here, just so I can hear myself talk a little bit more. And so back in the day, like I was saying, she was designed before the whole champion role thing was really set in stone. So Riot basically had to pick a category to put her in and kind of decide where they wanted to balance her from there. And I think it's a fair assessment to say that Shyvana is supposed to be a juggernaut, right? And so to recap, what a juggernaut is a champion that has high durability, usually based on health, and can do high damage, but is very, very limited in their target selection. So, Garen, I think, is a very archetypal juggernaut. He does a lot of damage if he can get in close with judgment, but he doesn't really have any way in to fight besides running at you with his movement speed. With Decisive Strike kinda helps, but not really that much. So thinking of that model, when we look at Shyvana covers most of the same aspects of a juggernaut. She does a lot of damage if she can get in close. She's really, really tanky, but she has the disadvantage of not having a very effective way in. Now, she does circumvent some of the dangers of picking a juggernaut in that Dragon's Descent, her ultimate, does give her kind of a free pass into fights. Now, the disadvantage with Dragon's Descent is that it's interruptible, and it also kind of puts Shyvana at odds with her actual kit, her actual design, I should say. Because a Juggernaut shouldn't have a reliable way into fights. So how does that fit Shyvana then? How does that make Shyvana bounceable? The one other issue I think we need to take a look at here is that Juggernauts are generally supposed to be health tanks. They're not supposed to build high resistances. That's something reserved for Wardens and Vanguards, the true tanks of League of Legends. So the fact that her passive gives her basically free stats makes it really difficult. So what Riot's done, if you're not familiar with the changes yet. So the first change they did is to her E. Her Dragon Form E, I should say. Before, what it did is it shot out a cone of fireballs in front of her that marked all enemies hit, which is great, especially because Shyvana, generally speaking, has I guess a desire to have all enemies clumped up right in front of her, so that way she can do the most amount of damage, especially with her Dragon Form Q. The difficulty comes in that her Dragon Form E really isn't that impactful. It doesn't do that much. She kind of hits you and then you run away, and it's not that great. And it doesn't really even punish you that much. In fact, her human form E is almost better. So what Riot did is they changed it so her E now fires a giant fireball, I guess, that detonates either at a target location or when it hits an enemy champion. And when it detonates, it damages all enemies in a wide area and leaves a burning field behind that constantly applies Shyvana's burn passive to people. Now this is a really good change because what it does is it gives Shyvana a little bit more health at a range, while simultaneously also letting her, I guess, zoning for people, picking a point and saying, I'm strong here, you have to fight me here, which I think is a very cool Juggernaut thing to do, and it helps her kind of zone, I guess, for people. It's a weird change. I'm not entirely sure how it's going to play out, but I think overall it's probably a good thing. Next we have Shyvana's ultimate. Now, there weren't really significant changes done to her ultimate, but one of the biggest things Riot did is they made it unstoppable. Right? So in the same vein as Malphite's ultimate Unstoppable Force or Vi's Assault and Battery, that kind of thing. So no longer can Shyvana try to ult at somebody only to get knocked back or pulled or anything in the middle of her ult and just kind of be a dragon very far away from people she wants to rip in half. Nowadays, if she ults, she will guaranteed reach her destination. She will get some damage on targets, and especially she can jump over things like walls without getting accidentally interrupted by enemy crowd control. That's a really huge change. It gives her the ability to get into fights more reliably. Now, this is a problem for Juggernauts, but I think especially with Shyvana, she doesn't have sticking power unlike some other Juggernauts. So Darius, for example, has difficulties getting into fights, but once he's in fights, he can stick to a target fairly well. He has his pull, he has a slow, he can get bonus move speed because he'll almost always rush Black Cleaver, so he'll get the bonus move speed from the Rage passive. So Darius can stick to targets, but he has no way in. Shyvana is a Juggernaut that kind of does it a little differently. She can easily get into fights with Dragon's Descent. Her problem is sticking to things. And sure, Burnout helps a little bit, but it's not a one-size-fits-all fix, right? It's still just running at people with move speed. There are no slows outside of red buff, so I think it's a good change overall. Now, to compensate, Shyvana did lose some damage on her R and some range on her R, so she won't be able to Dragon's Descent on you from quite as far away, but it's still there. Finally, Shyvana's passive. I think these are the most contentious changes for Shyvana. Before all Dragonborn really did is just give her free stats that scaled with their level and were doubled in Dragonborn. Which, honestly, I'm not usually a big fan of these ball of stat type passives. They don't lend any interesting gameplay. Even something like Morgana's Soul Siphon, I'm not really a big fan of because, okay, sure, she gets free lifesteal, but there's no interesting gameplay around it. It's just, okay, she gets free lifesteal, and that's something she has, I guess. So what they did is Riot decided, first, the reason they're changing it in the first place is because they had to remove part of her kit, because she had too much going for her already after the changes they made, and it was going to be difficult for them to suitably balance the rest of Shyvana's kit without trimming power elsewhere. The problem is, as soon as you start cutting power from her passive, it starts becoming even more lackluster than it already is, to the point of saying, why does she even have this? So the change to her passive is essentially an attempted compromise. It gives Shyvana a little bit more interesting gameplay, as she's now like the dragon-taking champion, because she just deals flat 10% more increased damage to dragons, and it also rewards her for killing dragons, or for her team killing dragons. She doesn't necessarily have to be there to benefit. So it's a bit of a nice compromise. I think as far as Riot's concerned, that's kind of what you wanted to go for, as a way to keep Shyvana with her tanky stats, but also not just hand it to her on a silver platter. There's a little bit more gameplay involved. So I do like it. As far as the changes go, I do feel like Shyvana will be a little bit more viable than she was before. Maybe not necessarily LCS material. I feel like besides Season 5 World's Juggernauts are just not very good champions, with the exception of Olaf, I guess I should say. Olaf has seen a lot of play recently. But I do feel like it will help Shyvana be a lot more viable and will help her possibly see play at least at the higher tiers. So, and I would love to hear your guys' comments on the Shyvana changes, especially if any of you guys are Shyvana mains or diehard Shyvana players. Let me know what you guys think of the Shyvana changes and what they've done. So that's kind of part one of what I wanted to talk about today. The next thing I kind of wanted to cover was Camille. So now, there was the recent Camille comic that just came out. I'll have a link to that in the description for you guys in case you haven't seen it. I know it was advertised on the client, though, so probably most of you guys have seen it. But anyways, I just wanted to talk about Camille and her comic. I'm very excited to see kind of a teaser for a new champion, especially because it kind of came out of nowhere, right? Doesn't do this kind of beating around the bush thing. And the next patch, she'll probably be in, so we'll get one more champion before the end of the year. And hopefully the Warwick rework as well, but that's a podcast topic for another time. But right now, let's talk about Camille. So obviously, Piltover champion. So, that comes with, sorry. It's actually more difficult than you might think to do one of these with a stream up, because I keep wanting to watch that and talk about that, but anyways. So to talk about Camille, so she's Piltovian. And I think the most striking thing about her so far is I honestly can't tell if she's a machine or human. The little lines under her eyes and the fact that she has the blade legs make me think that, you know, she might be a robot, but at the same time I'm doubtful. For starters, most of the other robot champs of the game, if you look at things like Blitzcrank and Oriana, they're facsimiles of human beings. They're not true sentience, I guess, true machines. They don't really have emotions in the way that Camille seems to. Camille has, you know, dedicated to Piltover. She has a lot of, I guess, pride, a lot of desire to help Piltover and to protect her from threats. But at the same time, she's not in. She's personally invested. She really doesn't like that Baron guy that she killed, and she has, you know, she has very strong opinions about the gal trying to marry him. So at that point, I don't really think she's a robot. She doesn't match up with what we've seen of robots in Runeterra so far. So the only thing I can assume is that either through desire or through maybe an accident, she lost her lower half and had it replaced with mechanical appendages, you know, to, I guess, help serve her cause, to help her out in defending Piltover. Is kind of Piltover's Batman, kind of how she seems to be, you know, doing what she thinks is right for the city, regardless of what the people think. So that's the first thing I wanted to think about, and I think that kind of the other interesting part that her design lends to is that her legs are obviously her primary means of attack because they've got the blades. They have the little attack on Titan-esque repelling cables, which I thought were an interesting feature there. But so most champions in League don't actually use their legs for like weapons, I guess. If that makes any sense. Like, everyone is either swinging a weapon with their arms, they're punching people, they're very top-heavy. And so it'll be interesting to see how Camille works in game, because I'm assuming most of her attacks, especially her auto attacks, will be kicks. Obviously, we're discounting kicks. Most of her attacks will consist of kicking people. So I think that gives her a kind of an interesting dynamic in the game. See if we can maybe get a spinning bird kick far off of oh god, what's her face? Street Fighter character. I'm totally blanking on the name right now. Someone's gonna get mad at me for this. I apologize in advance, but that kind of a thing. I think could be interesting. I'm also going to be interested to see if the repelling cables show up in her in-game kit. Because, I don't know, maybe that'll allow her to, like, dash around. Maybe she can kind of pull herself to an enemy champion, but not pull them to her. Could be interesting. Her design right now makes me think she'll probably end up being another skirmisher champion, which, yeah, we just got one in the form of Kled, but Riot seems to double up on these things. I know we had Jinx and Lucian released back-to-back. We had 2 champions with Resurrection passives, Zac and Aatrox released back-to-back. So I would not at all be surprised if we went from someone like Kled to someone like Camille being another skirmisher. But we'll find out. The other thing I want to talk about real quick about Camille is her comic and kind of how it talks about the new Zaun-Piltover relationship in the lore. Before, the two city-states were closely interconnected because of how they had differing views on technology. Piltover was very much so refined, I guess. They wanted to make sure that only good inventions, quote-unquote good inventions, made it to live. They were very stringent with security processes. At the same time, that was stifling. There were certain things they said you can't do. There were certain things that they would make rulings on and take away from you. I always say that if Blitzcrank had been invented in Piltover, he likely would not have been granted freedom. He would have been either, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, turned off, I guess, kind of removed as a function. Or alternatively, he would have ended up being, you know, serving as a regular machine of drudgery and not necessarily the artificial intelligence that he is. Meanwhile, Zaun is a lot more lax. Basically, you can do anything you want in Zaun. But this comes at a price. Environmental regulations, nil. Health regulations, non-existent. So you can do whatever you want, and this leads to Zaun being kind of a capitalist wasteland, I guess you would say. Environmental pollution is everywhere. You get weird creatures like Twitch showing up. It's very interesting to see kind of the discrepancy between Zaun and Piltover. And Camille kind of talks about the divide between the two, and it seems like in the new lore, the two city-states are a lot closer together. I know there has been talk of Zaun and Piltover actually being one city-state now. people are hypothesizing that Zaun is actually just like the slums of Piltover or something along those lines, which I'm kind of doubtful because I think a lot of Zaun fans wouldn't be too into that, but you know, it might be interesting to see if that's actually the route they decide to go with. At any rate, Zaun and Piltover really haven't changed too much from that old style, I guess, of thinking, in that Zaun is still going to be the do whatever you want, capitalist hellhole. Piltover will still be the utilitarian, quote-unquote, utopia. We'll find out if it's actually that glittering. I hope we get down to that nitty-gritty eventually. But so, it does seem like, though, the city-states have a lot more of an interaction together. It's easy for people to go back and forth between the two, as evidenced by the fact that the Baron was easily able to get to Piltover. In Echo's lore, it mentions that, especially in his comic, there was the Piltover gentleman who shot his friend, who just wandered around in Zaun. And in the old lore, that never would happen. People would know that there was a Pilty in their town, so to speak. But it seems like that's possibly an everyday occurrence. Piltover citizens and Zaunites going back and forth between each other's cities. So, at the very least, the two are very close together, with possibly close economic ties as well. And I will be interested to see kind of how that develops over time. The other thing Camille's lore kind of talks about, or comic kind of talks about, we don't have true lore yet, but it kind of talks about the power dynamic in Piltover and how noble families are kind of in charge of Piltover and have a lot of influence on how the city runs. So, not necessarily one ruling council like it was in the past, but sort of a collection of baroniates, I guess. It's going to be interesting to see. I'm really looking forward to more and more at some point. I really want to see this develop more. And fortunately, the whole universe thing that Riot just set up is the perfect way to describe it. And that kind of brings me to my last point for today. My last point with Grabbag is the universe page. I am so very happy that Riot has finally decided to go through with this. We finally have a story hub. There's no more directing people to wiki pages and dredging up old things that Riot's done, you know, doing Google searches, trying to find it. It's all in one spot. You can easily find champion lore, champion relationships, full stories, art assets especially are huge. It's so interesting to look through the art that they've done for Demacia and Noxus and all these places that we really haven't seen too far. Because I know I've talked about before, Bilgewater, Shurima, and the Shadow Isles were really the only places of late that got any development, which was fine because we've been asking for follow-up and continuation to the Shurima and Bilgewater stories that had happened before. So it was really nice for me to see that we're starting to look at places other than those three, and we're starting to kind of develop them more. And so that's number one what I'm really excited about Universe. The other thing is Universe came with 8 updated champion bios. Now, there are 8 updated champion flavor text, I guess, or color text, which are the stories that kind of give an insight to how the champion thinks, how they act, kind of how they behave in the world, beyond just the brief bio snapshot that you get. So the eight champions, I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. I know it's Israel, Echo, Jax, Cassiopeia, Fiddlesticks, and the 3 other, Rek'Sai, and a couple others I can't remember right now. But they all got their updated color text, which is really great. I'm glad Riot is finally doing this, especially for champions that aren't currently getting updated. And the other thing that I really like about it is that we got text for champions that have not been fully retconned to be part of the world yet. Jax in particular is one champion whose lore was inherently tied to the Institute of War and the League of Legends. I mean, he didn't exist without it. So to see now Jax behaving in the world beyond the Institute of War is really interesting, and I'm glad that Riot is starting to give these champions a bit of thought. They've also updated the bios of a few other champions that were Institute of War related, like Lee Sin, Nocturne, and make them more a part of the world without necessarily explaining too much into their origins as of yet. But we know at least the direction Riot is trying to take the characters, which I'm very, very excited for, and I'm very thankful that Riot is finally doing these things. You know, this is something that the community has been kind of headcanoning and thinking about for a long time. This Riot finally taking charge is pretty great, and I'm looking forward to see it grow. That's all I've got for you tonight. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. As always, Please let me know anything that you thought was off about the podcast or that I can improve upon. This is definitely still a work in progress, so don't assume that, this is how the format can stay. I am definitely open to change. And let me know what you thought on the topics we kind of discussed tonight. If you're a Shyvana player, or if you're a lore buff like I am, or if you're just really excited for our new champion, Camille, let me know in the comments. Let's get a discussion going. Let's kind of talk about some of these things. As always, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate each and every one of you who watches these videos and reblogs the posts. And I will talk to all of you guys later. Have a good night.